Hello, guys. Welcome back to the MMA Soccer channel. My name is Frazer, and this is the third in a series of three stats breakdowns ahead of UFC 280 this Saturday night in Abu Dhabi. Be sure to check out the YouTube channel. We've got a really big bumper UFC 280 preview podcast on there that myself and Tim Wheaton recorded on Monday. Today. This is being recorded on Monday. Recorded earlier this morning. Yeah, be sure to check that out because that is a really good listen where we go in depth on pretty much each and every important fight on the card. But yeah, be sure to check out as well on the YouTube channel. I've done a stats breakdown for the main event between Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira. And I've also done a stats breakdown on the co-main event between Aljamain Sterling and TJ Dillashaw. But this one focuses on the feature bantamweight bout on the card between Petr Yan and Sean O'Malley. I'm going to go on to UFCstats.com. So all the stats are on there. And we're just going to talk through what I think might be the sort of more important stats to keep an eye out for, and give you a little, if you haven't already watched the preview podcast, give you a little sort of idea as to where I think this fight will go and how it will play out. So like I say, UFCstats.com, it's probably they're really quick on post fight, as it were, as to where they get the stats out there really quickly. Obviously, UFC 280, you've got all the fights down here that you can check out. They've got past events from this past weekend, upcoming events. But like I said, we'll be focusing on Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley for this one. So we'll just jump straight into the tail of the tape. 16-3 with for Petr Yan, 15-1 and 1 no contest for Sean O'Malley. Now that's certainly interesting because on paper you'd see Petr Yan and you think definitely the vastly more experienced man. Well, he's only had 19 fights in comparison to Sean O'Malley's 17 fights. With that being said, the level of competition that Petr Yan and the sort of level that he's fought at in comparison to Sean O'Malley, there's no comparing the two men, unfortunately. The average fight time for both men, Sean O'Malley's got almost, he almost fights for half the amount of time that Petr Yan does. Now, it's worth remembering, though, that Petr Yan's last 4 fights, I believe, have all been championship fights, 2 of which have gone the distance and 2 of which have been ended, slightly before that 25-minute mark. Sean O'Malley still yet in the UFC to fight over 25 minutes, or be scheduled for 25 minutes in the UFC. So that's worth bearing in mind. The weight, neither guy's ever struggled with the weight, 135 pounds. Obviously, this is at bantamweight, so that's not an issue. We don't need to be too worried about either man missing weight, but both men will want to hit bang on 135 pounds, just on the off chance that something happens to either Aljamain Sterling or TJ Dillashaw in the co-main event. These guys are on tap. We know Alexander Volkanovski's weighing in for the main event or backup fighter. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, that TJ Dillashaw has to pull out of the fight. Petr Yan doesn't want to have to miss the opportunity to fight for the bout because he weighed in at 136. Expect both of these guys to weigh in at 135 pounds. I purposely missed the height, and now we'll move on to the height and your reach. I think these two should be sort of together. Petr Yan, 5'7", 67-inch reach. Sean O'Malley, 5'11", 72-inch reach. So he's got a 5-inch reach advantage and a 4-inch height advantage. Both guys are down and switch hitters, which doesn't surprise me, having watched the way they both fight. But going back to the height and reach, Petr Yan also fights quite compact, quite small, quite tight. He's got a really good boxing guard. He doesn't fight with his hands down. He's got his hands up, and that lead hand is constantly out there moving and sort of probing. Sean O'Malley fights long. We've seen it. He goes for long looping shots. And I think that in this one, Sean O'Malley can't fight too long. He has to keep Petr Yan on the end of his jab, yes. And he has to keep Petr Yan on the end of his shots. But if he misses with one of those looping shots, expect Petr Yan to come through and really sort of make him pay for that, as it were. I kind of alluded to what I'll go on to talk about we'll move straight on to the striking stats here. The jab of Sean O'Malley and the sort of long range kicks and long range punches, I think, are going to be key for Sean O'Malley to keep Petr Yan off him, because Petr Yan will walk forward all fight. And Sean O'Malley has to be the defensive striker, which is kind of why the Sean O'Malley versus Pedro Munoz fight was difficult to judge. Obviously, it went to a no contest due to the eye poke, but Sean O'Malley was waiting for Pedro to lead the dance, and Pedro didn't seem too willing to lead the dance. Of course, that's now irrelevant because of the eye poke rendered it a no contest. But Sean O'Malley wants Petr Yan to lead the dance in this one so that he can counter and he can move and he can, not receive a big shot from Petr Yan. Petr Yan is going to be looking to corral Sean O'Malley up against the fence and unload. One way that I think Petr Yan can do that is through leg kicks. And I want to double check a statistic that I found at the weekend, because the leg kicks of Sean O'Malley, the leg kicks, to Sean O'Malley are a huge issue. He doesn't defend leg kicks well, and we saw, against Andre Sukumtar, it was a tough watch for fans of Sean O'Malley. He didn't defend the leg kicks well, and he'll say it was a leg injury, but to me it was quite clear that it was a leg injury forced by. I can't find this leg kick statistic. It's very frustrating. But yeah, going back to my point, he didn't deal with the leg kicks well of Andre Sukumtar, and I think it was a high kick. Having watched some tape, it was a high kick that was blocked that hurt the leg, and then why Andre Sukumtar didn't attack the legs, I'm not quite sure. Marlon Vera chewed up his legs, and as did Pedro Munoz last time out. Petr Yan, to stop the movement of Sean O'Malley, has to chew up the legs. It was a crazy statistic that I was looking for, that I'll drop on Twitter at Frazer MMA. It's something to do. I think Sean O'Malley, of all the leg kicks that have ever been thrown at him, he's defended something ridiculous like 5%, and the other 95% have just landed on that leg. For someone with a history of being hit by leg kicks, that isn't a good sign for Sean O'Malley or Sean O'Malley fans. But we'll have to wait until Saturday night to see if Petr Yan chooses to go down that road. Strikes landed per minute. Sean O'Malley strikes landed per minute. I think this is a slightly deceiving statistic. I'm going to click into the fight with Chris Martino. 230 strikes landed, all of which were significant across 3 rounds. In the first round, he landed 59 strikes to the head, 15 strikes to the body, 3 strikes to the legs. So a total of 77 strikes. Second round, 70 strikes. Third round, 83 strikes. These are phenomenal numbers by Sean O'Malley. But then you look at the you look into a more normal fight, as it were, against Julian Paiva the time before last. Sean O'Malley, 40 total strikes landed. Again, insane amount of total strikes landed, but it's not. This is the real anomaly here. 230 strikes landed against Pedro Munoz. This was stopped in the second round. You can tell his output has dropped off significantly. 15 strikes landed in the first round, and through the best part of half of the round, 10 strikes landed. With that being said, we have to go off what the UFCstats.com says. 7.75 strikes landed per minute. He's an active fighter, Sean O'Malley. He although he does play on the defensive, when he finds an opening, he takes it. Likewise with Petr Yan, 5.45 strikes landed per minute. Again, I think that's slightly deceiving. I think a lot of those strikes were the ground and pound strikes that were landed on Jose Aldo in their fight. Again, against Uriah Faber, it just landed at will on Uriah Faber, who had no business being in there at the time. What is interesting is strikes absorbed per minute. 3.48 for Sean O'Malley, 3.88 for Petr Yan. So, there's not a huge differential between the two, but Petr Yan absorbs slightly more strikes, which is surprising because we've never seen Petr Yan hurt in there. We've never seen him sort of really, really put on the back foot, because he's got that kind of style where even if you land, take 3 or 4 to land 5 or 6. With Sean O'Malley, I feel like he doesn't enjoy getting hit as much as Petr Yan, which is ironic to say that, a fighter enjoys getting hit, but Petr Yan can absorb the strikes and carry on walking forward, while Sean O'Malley will shell up, absorb a few strikes, look to circle around and get his back off the fence, which is probably why Sean O'Malley's defense is slightly high at 64% against 61%. But again, they're not massively different. The striking accuracy is something I missed out earlier. on purpose because I wanted to talk about how each fighter absorbs strikes before talking about the striking accuracy. Sean O'Malley's accuracy 62% is extremely high, especially for someone who can hit as hard as Sean O'Malley. Pound for pound in the bantamweight division, looking up and down, and yes, he hasn't fought the top end competition. He's one of the hardest hitters. I think it's between him and Cody Garbrandt and maybe even Petr Yan. But Sean O'Malley can hit, and he can hit hard. He's an amazing talent, but I think he may have just bitten off a little bit more than he can chew with Petr Yan. 62% against someone that shells up is a good percentage to have if you're Sean O'Malley, because if for whatever reason he does get on the offensive when he can sting Petr Yan and land a few strikes with Petr Yan shelling up, Sean O'Malley is going to find openings if Petr Yan just sort of walks forward in that sort of shelled up style that he usually does. What I wouldn't expect to see out of Sean O'Malley is plenty of spinning attacks, spinning kicks. We've seen him throw it before, switch high kicks, spinning back elbow, spinning back fist. I don't expect to see any of that out of Sean O'Malley. And the reason for this is 1.48 takedowns landed per minute for Petr Yan. I think, we'll compare that straight away to Sean O'Malley's 64% takedown defense. Sean O'Malley has never really been tested in the takedown realm. If we go through his fights, he's only had Thomas Almeida land a takedown on him and Andre Sukumtar, but that is a statistic, again, that is highly flawed. 4 of 7, but if we look, 3 of those were landed in the final round when O'Malley was injured. Thomas Almeida, he did secure the 1 takedown. I mean, that's why I can't even remember it. 1 takedown secured, but the control time was 0. There's 0 seconds. He wasn't able to control Sean O'Malley, which is, I'm not sure why that's been classed as a takedown. Pedro Munoz, didn't shoot for any takedowns on Sean O'Malley. Petr Yan, for me, has to mix it up. And I think Sean O'Malley probably knows that Petr Yan is going to take him down. Yan's got amazing trip takedowns, as we saw against Magomed Magomedov back in the ABC days, and especially what we saw against Aljamain Sterling in their first fight. He was able to sweep the leg of Aljamain Sterling, take Aljamain's weight from underneath him, really manipulate his weight over his heels, and then take that weight away from him. I think if he's to beat Sean O'Malley and if he's to beat him convincingly, he probably does that in the first or second round, is to take Sean O'Malley down. I don't think he submits Sean O'Malley, because I think Sean O'Malley is more than capable of defending himself on the floor. But I think Petr Yan's 1.48 takedowns per minute per round. Sorry, per fight. Average of 15 minutes. He averages 1 takedown, let's say, per fight. It may even only take 1 takedown for Petr Yan. We've seen pictures of him training with Arman Sarukian, who we know is a phenomenal wrestler, and that is not something that Sean O'Malley wants to look to do. Takedown actually 61%. That's not particularly high against someone, but a takedown defense of 64% for Sean O'Malley. These two are sort of ever related to each other. The accuracy against the defense. But you've got to think that if Petr Yan is to dominate this fight, he's got to mix up the ranges. He's got to go into the wrestling range. He's got to work in the clinch to negate this height and reach advantage that Sean O'Malley has over him. This is an irrelevant statistic. I think 0.54 takedowns landed on average, 50%. So, he's landed half the amount of takedowns that he's gone for. But Petr Yan's takedown defense of 90%, I think, is kind of speaks for itself. What I think is going to be a real big factor is most recent fights. This one shows the newest first. Petr Yan lost to Aljamain Sterling last time out. It wasn't a disqualification. It was a unanimous decision for Aljamain Sterling, I believe. I'm not sure if it was even a split. Oh, it was a split decision. So yeah, 48-47, 48-47, 48-47. 2 of those going in favor of Aljamain Sterling. This is a difficult one for Petr Yan to take. He was winning the first fight against Aljamain Sterling until he was disqualified. He then won a fight of the night decision, as we can see back in October 20. Almost a year to the day. He beat Corey Sandhagen. Then he returned this April against Aljamain Sterling and lost. This is a tough loss for Petr Yan to take. And I think he's going to come back with a vengeance against Sean O'Malley. I think he sees O'Malley as an easy fight. He doesn't have to take this fight. I'm pretty sure he'll be ranked number 1 or number 2. Let me just double check UFC rankings. So yeah, Petr Yan ranked number 1 in the division. He doesn't have to take a fight against a dangerous guy who's ranked number 12. But he's taken this fight on and is clearly willing to risk it all in order to sort of put manners on Sean O'Malley and teach Sean O'Malley a lesson and get back in the win column. If you look down Petr Yan's UFC record, in his third fight he beat Douglas Silva de Andrade, then he beat John Dodson, then he beat Jimmy Rivera, then he dominated Uriah Faber, then he dominated Jose Aldo. Then he had the 2 fights with Aljamain Sterling, and in between those fights with a fight with Corey Sandhagen, he went 5 rounds. Well, he went the best part of 5 rounds with Jose Aldo. He went the best part of 5 rounds with he went the best part of 4 rounds with Aljamain Sterling and dominated him in that first fight before he was disqualified. He went 5 rounds with Corey Sandhagen, and then he went 5 rounds again with Aljamain Sterling. His level of competition in comparison to Sean O'Malley's is massively different. It's massively different. No disrespect to any of the guys that Sean O'Malley's faced, but none of these guys have ever fought for a title in the UFC. Marlon Vera is probably, on paper, the best guy that Sean O'Malley's faced. And keep on calling him O'Vera. Marlon Vera, sorry. Knocked him out. He injured the leg. He knocked him out on the floor and probably woke him up again. Thomas Almeida, back in the day, was a good fighter, but it was riding a 2-fight loss streak heading into that fight with Sean O'Malley. Chris Moutinho wasn't a UFC fighter prior to this, and I'm pretty sure he's not a UFC fighter now. He's finished in the fight after he fought Sean O'Malley. Rulian Paiva, career flyweight. I think he had one big win. So yeah, he had one big win against Kyler Phillips. I just want to double check. Yeah, so he's a career flyweight. He beat Kyler Phillips. He then stepped up in weight to face Sean O'Malley and was finished. Well, you're finishing a guy who's not in your weight class. And then Pedro Munoz, obviously, we weren't quite sure how that fight was even going to be sort of scored. But if you look, just comparing the last 5 wins, champion, Corey Sandhagen well in the title picture, champion again, former long-time featherweight champion, and this was for the belt. Jose Aldo and Uriah Faber, always in the question of best guys to never win a belt. Now you compare that to Sean O'Malley, no contest against Pedro Munoz. Pedro's definitely on a decline. Flyweight Paiva, not in the title picture, not even close. Moutinho, don't even think he's in the UFC anymore. Thomas Almeida, not in the UFC anymore, not a title contender. Marlon Vera, it was a loss, and you could, and yes, Vera's in the title picture now, but Sean O'Malley didn't beat him. That's the point I'm trying to make here. So I think what we can take away from the stats for sure is that despite the fact that Sean O'Malley on paper is the more active striker, I think he has to utilize that height and reach advantage and really pump out that jab, pump out the long, the sort of long, elongated shots. And Petr Yan's got to batter the leg, reduce the movement of Sean O'Malley, look to mix in the takedowns, which he does. And I think, although all the statistics, maybe, or a lot of the statistics, I should say, especially in the striking realm, are in favor of Sean O'Malley, I think Petr Yan can, he's got the power to hurt O'Malley. We've never seen Petr Yan struggle, wobble with a strike or anything like that. So I think Petr Yan is going to. I think Petr Yan might put manners on Sean O'Malley. He might finish him. I can see it going the distance as well. But Sean O'Malley's got nothing to lose. He's ranked number 12. If he loses to the number 1 guy, well, yeah, he's supposed to. If he beats the number 1 guy, well, happy days. He's now probably competing for the title next. For Petr Yan, he's got not an awful lot to gain other than getting, bouncing back with a potentially big win against a well-known guy. But, is a win over Sean O'Malley enough to get him the next title shot? We'll have to see what happens in the co-main event, but it's I believe he'd have to beat a Marlon Vera, maybe a Corey Sandhagen again. That was a fight of the year contender last year, or a Murab Dvalishvili before he can get another title shot. Or let's say that Aljamain Sterling defeats TJ in the co-main event, fight TJ. It's difficult for Petr Yan because he's got the on paper he's got the 2 losses to the current champion. He's going to want to be hoping that TJ Dillashaw pulls off the victory in the co-main event so that he can then sort of get a fresh matchup in the main event. But we'll have to wait and see as Saturday night. Like I said, check out the UFC 280 preview podcast. It's already on the YouTube channel. Check out my other 2 stats breakdown videos of the main event and co-main events, and enjoy the fights on Saturday night, guys. They're going to be good.